Good afternoon. Today's lecture for J300 is on copyright infringement, and I have titled it, Can I Use That Picture? Today's lecture will also not feature my charming and delightful face. You'll just be able to follow along with the slides with us today and the audio as well. So I titled this lecture, Can I Use This Picture, That Picture? Because I think a lot of us in 2020 find ourselves in a world where we are constantly sitting at computers and thinking to ourselves, should I use that picture or should I use that picture when I am creating a presentation, when I'm creating a design, when I'm doing my journalism? And the question of what pictures we can use and how is one that we should all be very well versed in. And of course, all of this stuff doesn't just have to do with pictures. It has to do with videos. It has to do with written works as well. So we're mostly concerned in this course with visual products. So we're going to be talking about it in terms of can I use that picture. But I think going back to the original idea that many of us find ourselves staring at the computer screen and wondering, should we right click and save that image to our computer and then use it for the project that we're working on? And the big construct that we should be thinking of is not really should, because that's kind of an ethical concern, right? But when we're talking about things that involve copyright, we're talking about legal concerns. So we should get it into our heads that we are not talking about should we do this or that, but instead can we? Are we legally allowed to do it? So since we're talking about a legal construct, we need to make sure that we define this legal construct. So let's talk about copyright and let's get ourselves square with that term first, right? So copyright protects original works, right? Things that are done in so many aspects of journalism and communication, whether they be literary, dramatic, musical, artistic. I mean, the list of things here that you might be tempted to use as part of a project that you're working on are just so wide, and many of them are protected by copyright. So again, going back to the example of you're creating a sorority t-shirt, you're creating a fraternity hat, you're creating a poster for your club. Are you infringing on someone's copyright when you are taking something that they've done already? So the U.S. Patent Office is where I got this definition of copyright from, and they obviously have a huge authority when it comes to copyright law. And they also give a couple tips about the length of copyright here. One of them is if it is completed by an individual author, right? So one author creates this thing, and if something is copyrighted by that author, that copyright lasts the life of the author plus another 70 years. So this is why Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare is not copyrighted anymore. It is well over 70 years past the copyright of that particular author, whereas the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes in it is created by another author, and it is still protected by copyright because it is not nearly as old as Shakespeare's life is. Other works can last somewhere between 95 years past the publication date or 120 years from the creation date, depending on whichever is shorter. And there's a large part of law that is trying to push this back, right? The Disney fortune is constantly trying to make sure that its trademarks and copyrights extend as far forward as they can, because once those copyrights and trademarks expire, then things like Mickey Mouse become part of the public domain, and that makes making money as Disney a lot trickier, right? So why are we talking about all of this, and what is this chart all about? So my big point in showing you this chart is, number one, this is going to be the roadmap for our lecture. We're going to kind of use this to navigate our way through. But I'm also using the overview of this roadmap here to point something out, and that is this. If you're trying to use someone else's picture, what you're doing is you're creating a very, very tricky and curvy path for yourself. You're trying to make things really, really really difficult. What I mean by that is, if you create your own image, then the path is relatively simple, as I'll show you in a moment here. But if you're using someone else's image, then you're going to go ahead and make things much, much more difficult. And you're going to need to clear a lot of hurdles, potentially, to use that image. So let's start into this tour of this chart with the understanding that we don't have to go through very many of these steps if we could just simplify things and make sure that we create the images ourselves rather than relying on other people's creation. So let's start here. Starting here means that we ask ourselves, did we create or capture this image ourselves, right? Again, this is the easiest way to ensure that we do have the ability to use the photo. If the answer is yes, it seems like we should just be able to say, well, it's ours, we can go ahead and use it. But there's one little sub-question that we need to answer here, and that is the idea of, did you create this idea for the image as well as the image itself? It seems relatively straightforward that we would have created the idea for the image as well, but that's not necessarily true. There are times when somebody else creates the idea for the image and you are in essence just copying it when you press the button on your camera. Let me give you an example of something like that. My family and I traveled to Puerto Rico a few years ago, and I took a picture of my daughter on the beach, and it was beautiful and it was sunset, and I backlit her and I used a particular lens and I put the palm tree in one place. And I did all of this stuff with a purpose, and I thought it looked really, really great. And after that, another photographer went to that same location with his daughter and shot the exact same photo with a different pose, backlit with the palm tree and all, right? So could I sue this person for copyright infringement? And the answer is yes, because this was my idea and it was taken and stolen by this other person. Same place, same location, same everything. Now, the good news is that this was a dear friend of mine, and he took the photo after asking for my permission to, shoot the same exact kind of photo. And I said, well, yeah, of course, right? But if this were not the case, and it was somebody who was limiting my ability to make money off of my original photo, then I would have a copyright infringement case against him. As it is, that's not the case, and my buddy can have his photo and enjoy it, right? The other direction that we can go, which is going to lead us through all kinds of other rabbit holes, is this. Did you create or capture the image yourself? And the answer no to that is going to lead us to this very, very sticky part of the chart. This part of the chart that is really probably the most important part of the chart for you to memorize as journalists and communications professionals. Because so many people say fair use, and they kind of wave their hand in an elegant way, and they say fair use saying that it exempts them from to be able to use an image in a particular way. And what we need to do is we need to make sure we understand fair use, and fair use is going to be more complicated than just waving your hands and saying fair use. So the three exemptions here that we have for fair use are going to be parody, which is the first one here. The second one is comment or criticism. And then the third one that we have is the idea of reporting on the news. Now these can overlap, as we'll see in a moment here, but if you're creating a parody of the original image, if you're commenting or criticizing the original image, or you're reporting on the news, any of those is going to get you closer, not all the way there, but closer to the idea of fair use. So an example of parody, right? We all know the UPS symbol, especially in these days of online shopping and quarantine, right? So if UPS is the symbol, then the parody of that symbol would be this, right? Somebody would make up a parody that would make fun of the original logo, right? That is protected by the idea of fair use. Another example of something that's protected by fair use is the idea of comment. So this is a photo on the left-hand side of the screen by Andreas Finnegar, and he took that photo, but I made all the notes on the right-hand side and labeled them as to how to light a portrait. So if I wanted to bring extra meaning to this photograph, I can do that by using the photograph as the piece that I'm going to comment on. You can literally see here that more than half of what's being done here with this diagram is my work. And so that kind of comment and criticism is okay. Even further to the side of criticism is this logo, right? It is the album cover from a Kanye album, right? And Rolling Stone reviewed that Kanye album. Why is it that Rolling Stone has the right to use this particular album image? Well, the reason that they are protected, the reason that they have the right to do that is fair use. They have the ability as a news outlet and as someone who is doing criticism to use that particular image, and that's protected. Finally, another example of this would be as a news source. For instance, this is the San Diego Union Tribune's coverage of Steve Jobs at his death in 2011. And when they did, they used a photo from one of the Apple conventions, and in the background, obviously, is the Apple logo. Now, someone, if they were to use the Apple logo in other ways, they could be sued for copyright infringement. But as a news gathering enterprise, this is protected. This is fine for them to use it in this way. However, we need to remember, too, that fair use isn't just as simple as going to over those three obstacles. We also have to answer these 4 further fair use questions, right? So make sure that you get it in your notes, the idea that fair use is not just as simple as getting yourself into either parody, comment, or criticism or news gathering, but you also have to be okay in terms of these 4 clauses that we're going to talk about. Let's call them fair use factors. So one of them would be this one. Are you transforming or repurposing the image? So is it transformative? That's a good one to add to your notes. The second one is, has the original image been published yet? That's an important one to consider. The third one is, will your publishing the image harm the market for the original image? And finally, how much of the image are you using? Are you using a substantial and vital part of that image? Let's give 4 examples of these fair use considerations. This is a famous photograph of President Barack Obama that was taken in 2006 by a photographer for the Associated Press. He was on a panel discussion and he was looking off into the distance, and the photographer captured this moment, right? And this photo became something even more iconic than the original photo. It became the poster that was, in a lot of ways, the logo and the visual presence for the Obama campaign. The question here is this transformative? Was the photo at its original transformed in any way when we look at this poster? And I think most people would say absolutely. We look at these 2 things side by side and we say, wow, it is starkly different. We have all of these uses of color and shadow. We've dropped out the American flag in the background, and we have put, a red and blue background. We've added the word hope. We've given the logo of Obama's campaign to onto his chest there. There's so much that's happened here that this indeed is transformed. Now, if that seems obvious to us that it was transformed, we should be maybe a little bit surprised by the fact that this went to a copyright court, that the Associated Press sued the artist who created this logo over here on the left, the poster on the left, and it went so far that the lawsuit went into the discovery phase, and the artist was nervous enough about this that he falsified his records and he said untrue things to the investigators, and he ended up settling the lawsuit and having to do community service and pay some retribution as well. Now, that doesn't definitively answer whether this is transformative or not, but this is just to say this, and this is something that one of my colleagues here at KU, Janelle Belmas, told me about copyright, she said it really depends on what judge you get on what day. And this is to say that copyright is not a stark and easy thing to look at legally. We might look at this as transformative. One judge might agree with us that it's transformative, and a totally different judge might look at it and say that it is not transformative at all. So that's just to say, if you're going to use somebody's work, make sure that it is starkly transformative. The second example is this idea of, has it been published yet? The example comes from The Nation, which was a magazine back in the time of Gerald Ford, the president, and he was writing his autobiography. Before he could publish his autobiography, The Nation went ahead and published portions of that book, and he was able to say that it was a copyright infringement because he had yet to publish his book. Another example here, this is about the idea of harming the market. This is the Seinfeld aptitude test, and it's based on the Seinfeld television show. The Seinfeld creators did not create this. It was an independent creator, and they said, we're going to create a Seinfeld aptitude test. Well, this does injure the marketplace for the Seinfeld brand to ever want to create something like this. If they wanted to create a Seinfeld aptitude test book in the future, they wouldn't have the ability to. So this is a copyright infringement. Another more personal example of copyright infringement when it comes to this would be this photograph right here. If you look at the byline for this photograph, you'll notice that I took this photograph because one of my buddies who works at Time Magazine asked me to be the photographer on this assignment, and so I photographed one of the local journalists who works for Time Magazine and his family. And I got paid for this, right? I was able to make money off of this. If somebody would have taken this photo and they would have sold it somewhere else, it would have injured my ability to sell the photo in the future. And so that is another example of that marketplace idea as well, right? And then the final one that we already kind of touched on already, which is the idea of how much of the image are we going to use? Are we going to use a significant part of the image? So let's say that this is a really, really amazing photograph of a very famous soccer star who went on to become, you know, a World Cup star. If I took this photo, then it's my property, right? Could someone come along and use that photo without my permission? And the answer is no, right? That it would certainly, this is a significant part of the image. What if they went ahead and cropped it this way? Would they be able to use it? And the answer is clearly no. That's still a significant and vital part of the image. However, if they were to use this part of the photo, it would be very hard for me to have a copyright suit against them. And so we need to square in our mind the idea of how much of the photo is being used and is it a significant part of the photo, okay? Now, we've just gone through all of those fair use criteria. Remember, we started all the way up at Parody and we worked all the way down to here. And the answer still is maybe you can use that. You're probably on safe ground. The idea that I'm trying to really drive home here is that even when you feel like you're on legally safe ground by using somebody else's image, it's going to be really, really tricky for you to prove that you absolutely have that use. So, what are your other options? If fair use is so sticky, what are your other options, right? Another one that you could use is a very specific kind of fair use, and that's educational fair use. What are we talking about when we're talking about educational fair use? What we're talking about is literally what we're doing right here. All of these images that I've pulled, all of these images that I'm showing to you right now, I can show them to you because this is an educational pursuit and I'm able to put it in front of you in that way. Now, if I were to publish a book and start making money off of all of these images, that would become a much stickier place to be, right? The second thing that I can try, if not educational fair use, is the idea of purchasing the image. And this might seem like quite a drag in 2020, right? It seems like we should be able to jump onto the internet and just grab photos that we want to and not have to pay for them. But let me give you this example. This is a photograph of Ned Yost after the Kansas City Royals won the World Series in 2015. This photo was taken by one of my good friends, Jamie Squire. When he took this photo, he had to drive down to the parade. He waited hours and hours and hours. He had to pay for parking. He had to put gas in his car. He had to, pay for a laptop. He had to have his camera gear cleaned and in good working condition. And so when we look at the image here, we can see that he shot it, right? And we can also see that that image has a cost. And that cost might seem crazy, right? The idea that we would need to pay $300 to use that photograph is absolutely insane. But it's also absolutely sensible because Jamie has health insurance and he has a car and he has a house and he buys sandwiches, and all of those things are made possible by people paying for these images. So paying for these images is certainly a way to make sure that you are clear on copyright. Okay. Why would you want to pay for a picture of Ned Yost? Because if you go through here and look on Google for images that are labeled for reuse, that are able to be reused, that are labeled, go ahead and take them, it's fine with me, you can see that we really only have a couple images of Ned Yost, maybe only 3 images that are here that we would have any interest in using. And none of them are this really awesome photo of him with the World Series trophy. So if we're going to obey copyright, then we're probably going to need to pay for an image like this one, right? Our alternative, other than Google, is going to be the idea that we could use Creative Commons. Some of you have used this before, and it's basically a collective that allows people to share photos and make sure that they can use them without infringing on copyright. So if you go to Creative Commons and start typing in search terms, you'll oftentimes find the images that you're looking for because people want to create a marketplace, a free marketplace, if you will, if there is such a thing, of images and creative materials. So back to our beginning chart here. The final thing that we can ask about this image is it impossible for us to get permission from the original source? Could we get the permission in any way or not? And the clauses over here I think are very helpful, right? If the creator has died and no one owns the rights, you are usually safe to use the image without permission. Notice that it's still going to the usually portion of that. So there are lots and lots of exceptions to that. So if you wanted to use a picture of cave paintings, obviously those Neanderthals are no longer around, their copyright would have expired. So if you yourself took a picture of something that they had drawn thousands of years ago, then you're fine. Could you use a photo that somebody else took of their cave paintings? No, not without their permission. So this leads us to an uncomfortable place in 2020. Again, we feel like we are kind of entitled to these images, but sometimes we have to live with the fact that we are indeed not entitled to them, that they are not our images at all, and that we need to pay for copyright, that we need to respect copyright, and that we need to make sure that we don't infringe on copyright. That's why we have this entire chart, and I think it all really boils down to what's in the top left-hand corner of the infographic. So if there's nothing else that you're going to write down about this entire lecture, I would have it be this. When in doubt, the rule above all others is to obtain permission from the original creator or copyright owner themselves, or just create the image yourself. Right? The idea that you are going to do it any other way is probably probably risky under copyright law. Now, just to prove that I am a man of my word here and that I do as I say, this whole presentation is based on this presentation, this infographic that I found at the beginning. And so it was the inspiration for what I'm doing here, and it is an educational material, but nonetheless, I want to give credit where credit is due. So thank you very much, the visualcommunicationguy.com, for giving me this inspiration for making this chart. I think I made it a little bit better, and I'm kind of proud of the way that it turned out. But that is what you're supposed to be looking for when you are trying to decide how to use a picture or whether to use a picture. I will tell you this, that the entire chart can be found on our Blackboard page. So if you'd like to study up for our exam using the chart itself without having to zoom around here on Prezi, then you are welcome to do that. That's it for today. That's all that I have in this lecture. I will speak at you again soon. I hope that things are good with you.